But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to live in unicorn land and pretend that you don't need energy to power up the buildings in which we live in order to make us be able to exist in this planet and actually have human flourishing. This amendment prohibits any of the funding in the Milcon VA appropriations bill from being used to carry out President Biden's executive orders on climate change. I was gratified to have offered a similar amendment and to see it adopted on the floor of the House with respect to the National Defense Authorization Act, what we call the NDAA. We believe that the United States military should have a singular focus, and that is also true for the Veterans Administration. It should have a singular focus, ensuring our veterans have the care they need, not advancing the climate fetish that is making us beholden to China for our energy needs, undermining our national security, undermining the very reason veterans put their lives on the line to defend this country. In August of 2021, the VA put forward a, quote, climate action plan, which includes indoctrinating VA employees with so-called climate literacy, pushing renewable energy consumption, sustainable buildings, and greenhouse gas emissions at VA facilities. Now VA is transitioning its fleet of over 22,000 vehicles to zero-emission vehicles. Now, mind you, our American public who want to go about carrying out their jobs and their livelihoods can't even afford vehicles anymore. We're clamping down on the ability of them to go purchase vehicles because we're limiting the production of the internal combustion engine. So we can have battery-powered automobiles that are being produced with lithium and cobalt and things being mined in Africa while children are being exploited and the Chinese Communist Party is being empowered. All while China, by the way, has got 1,100 coal-fired plants compared to our 250, and they're building 2 a week while we're basically doing nothing to advance anything with respect to reliable energy. Instead, we're putting all of our eggs in the unreliable energy basket, which makes us beholden to China, the Chinese Communist Party, and our enemies around the globe, rather than exporting liquefied natural gas and making us stronger. And again, the Veterans Administration ought to reflect the American people and our strength by focusing on its core mission, providing health care and providing benefits that are necessary for those who have served to defend our country. My Democratic colleagues apparently think you can power a VA hospital on wind and solar alone. And of course you cannot. It's not possible. Anybody who looks at it and looks at the data and see, on a windless, cloudy day, how are you powering a VA hospital? You're powering it with fossil fuels. You're powering it with what little nuclear power we have, given that we've been unable to build a nuclear plant, by far the most reliable non-CO2 producing energy in the world. We haven't been able to do it since the 1970s because of the regulatory infrastructure in this country. It's absurd. My colleague on the other side of the aisle go around ballyhooing about carbon dioxide, and the one reliable energy that you could do has been prevented through regulatory morass for the better part of my entire lifetime of 50 years. Instead, they go around producing wind and solar, which more indication, more information comes out about how horrific it has been for the planet, how horrific it is for children throughout this world mining those minerals, how empowering it is for our enemies. And here we are trying to turn the VA into essentially a promotion of the climate agenda for the radical left. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
To claim time in opposition, Madam Chair.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment, despite the wildfires, smoke-covered skies, life-threatening heat waves, and extreme weather we now face nearly every day in the United States, this amendment would hamstring our ability to address the accelerating threat of climate change. The scientific consensus is clear, and we need to get serious about preventing further damage by transitioning to clean energy sources while also working to mitigate the costs we already bear today. The Department of Defense has repeatedly recognized that climate change is a direct threat to the U.S. military's readiness, mission effectiveness, and their resilience. From rising sea levels that can flood coastal installations to more frequent extreme weather events that can damage our military infrastructure, these climate-related effects put our security at risk. I mean, don't take my word for it. Just look at the news. Just yesterday, the news reported that the ocean temperature in South Florida was more than 100 degrees. Yesterday, 101.1 degrees to be specific, in Everglades National Park in Manatee Bay. You know what happens at temperatures like that? At temperatures like that, we start seeing massive coral bleaching. It is not coral bleaching, high temperatures, sea level rise. Those are not someday things in Florida. They are right now things. In 2018, a Category 5 hurricane devastated Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, necessitating billions of dollars to repair and rebuild. And we can only mitigate against those costly scenarios if we can acknowledge that the changing climate and increasing extremes we must adapt to are real. Further, climate change directly impacts the health of our most vulnerable veterans. Increases in extreme heat, extreme weather events, and disease pose a threat to those who've served, particularly those who are older, who have pre-existing conditions, particularly those who have respiratory conditions, which often older veterans do. The policies targeted in this amendment provide a path to help us future-proof our military, incorporate climate risk analysis into military planning, enhance our energy security, address the health effects of climate change, and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. The gentleman from Texas might want to wish away or amend away global warming and climate change and its effects, but that simply isn't possible. And this amendment would result in leaving our military woefully unprepared and our nation on a path towards climate catastrophe in decades to come. I urge opposition to the amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Well, I'll just reiterate the extent to which we are turning over our national security to our enemies. 80% of the solar panels installed in the United States come from Chinese firms. 7 of the top 10 wind technology turbine manufacturers are Chinese firms. China controls 77% of EV battery manufacturing. The fact is, our national security is dependent upon our ability to produce liquefied natural gas, export it, be able to use the God-given minerals that we have in this country, oil and gas, to be able to power the world. There are some almost billion people on this planet who really have no access to electricity, some 3 billion who don't have access to reliable electricity and energy. And all we're doing is constraining the ability of the world to produce the energy necessary for human flourishing. We are all committed to trying to help improve the environment. Governor DeSantis in Florida has made enormous strides in improving the Everglades in Florida and received notoriety for doing so. In Texas, we have the most wind production of any state in the country. But you have to beg the question as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing if you don't have enough fossil fuels to back up the wind and the solar. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to live in unicorn land and pretend that you don't need energy to power up the buildings in which we live in order to make us be able to exist in this planet and actually have human flourishing in the face of weather and in the conditions that we have to live through.